When I refused to co-sign my nephew's $200K loan, my family called me a leech, living off their success. My father said, "You'll never be one of us." I didn't argue. I just left. 3 years later, I sponsored a fund that bought out my father's company. At the board meeting, I said one sentence that made him walk out in silence. Family businesses operate like cults. There's no middle ground. Either pledge complete loyalty or face excommunication. For 15 years, I played by those rules. I was the one who actually made the numbers work, while everyone else played big shot. Look, I never expected a parade for my contribution, but what happened 3 months ago still makes my blood boil every time I think about it. My family runs a regional construction operation that my father Wesley built from scratch. He's the type who believes yelling louder makes your point more valid. My brother Gavin is basically his clone. All confidence, zero substance. My sister Susan handles the people side of things, mostly covering for Dad's outbursts. Then there's Barry, Gavin's 26-year-old son, who finished his MBA last year and thinks he's the second coming of Elon Musk. Here's the thing about our business. It succeeded despite horrible financial decisions. Dad and Gavin would leap into risky ventures that somehow paid off, creating this mythology that their gut instincts were infallible. Meanwhile, I was the one working late restructuring debt and finding capital to keep us afloat after their latest impulse buy. Not that anyone noticed. The whole mess started when Barry came back from some influencer's wealth-building retreat in Scottsdale. Suddenly, he was obsessed with developing luxury tiny homes for digital nomads. Yes, in our Rust Belt town where the median income is like $42K. The math was absolute garbage. The land alone would drain the initial investment, and his revenue projections were straight-up fantasy. When I ran the numbers, we'd be hemorrhaging cash for at least 3 years before seeing a cent of profit. If everything went perfectly, which it never does. The smart play was obviously to pass, but Barry had already started posting about it on his LinkedIn and Instagram. He'd even made a cringy TikTok tour of the empty lot where he wanted to build. #future millionaire, #entrepreneur mindset. The algorithm gods had blessed him with a few thousand views, and now his ego wouldn't let him back down. So they called a family strategy session last month at Dad's house. I should have known something was up when they ordered my favorite pizza and had actual good beer instead of Dad's usual Bud Light. Barry spent 40 minutes flipping through a PowerPoint that looked like it was designed by an AI that was only trained on motivational posters, revenue hockey sticks, market disruption, buzzword bingo. When he finished, everyone looked at me. That's when Barry dropped it. He needed someone to co-sign a $200K loan. His credit was trash from defaulting on student loans, and the bank wouldn't approve him solo. Dad and Gavin had already leveraged themselves to the hilt on the new equipment building that was running 30% over budget. So that left me, the only one with a decent credit score, because I actually pay my bills on time. I asked questions, basic, reasonable questions. Where was the market research? What were the comparable properties? What happened if construction costs went over budget? What was the contingency plan? The room got colder with each question. Barry kept saying things like, "You can't disrupt by following the old rules," and "exponential thinking requires faith." Pure garbage he picked up from whatever guru was selling courses that month. When I pulled out my analysis showing exactly why this would fail, Dad slammed his hand on the table, knocking over his beer. That's when it all came out. How I was always the negative one, the one who didn't believe in family, the one who was holding everyone back with my obsession with details. Dad said I was just a glorified calculator who couldn't see the big picture. Then came the sentence that still echoes in my head. Dad looked me dead in the eye and said I'd never be one of them, that I didn't have what it takes to build something real, that I was just leeching off their success, taking a salary while contributing nothing of value. The worst part? Everyone nodded. Susan, who I thought was at least somewhat on my side, actually said maybe I was jealous of Barry's vision. Gavin smirked like he'd been waiting years for this moment. I didn't explode. I just sat there, letting the realization wash over me. This wasn't new. This was just the first time they'd said it out loud. All those years staying late, fixing their messes, being the responsible one, it meant nothing. When I got home that night, I dug through some old files. Turns out I was making 30% less than Gavin, despite having more responsibilities. Dad had been systematically underpaying me for at least a decade. When the company had record profits last year, everyone got bonuses except me. The explanation in the HR notes already compensated fairly for bookkeeping duties. I spent the weekend in a rage-fueled investigation of our company structure. Found out Gavin and Dad had set up a separate LLC that was charging our main business consulting fees, basically siphoning profits into their personal accounts. The company was paying for Dad's Tesla, Gavin's lake house maintenance, and even Barry's Peloton subscription. Meanwhile, my request for upgraded accounting software had been denied 3 years running for budget constraints. Monday morning, I walked in early and cleaned out my desk. 15 years of my life packed into one cardboard box. I found an old family photo from when we opened our second location. Everyone smiling, arms around each other. For a second, I almost weakened. Then I remembered the look in Dad's eyes when he called me a leech. I left my keys and company card on the desk with a sticky note. Calculators don't need severance. Petty? Maybe. But it felt good. The first month was rough. Anxiety attacks at 3 a.m., scrolling through Indeed until my eyes burned, watching my savings dwindle. Susan texted a few times asking where important files were. I left her on read. Gavin posted a company photo on Instagram with the caption, "Streamlined team ready for explosive growth." I blocked him. Then Barry started his project anyway. Somehow he got the money. I checked public records and found out Dad had mortgaged his house. The family genius strikes again. I rented a cheap apartment across town, started picking up gig work doing financial analysis. Rage is actually a powerful motivator. Every time I felt like giving up, I'd remember Dad saying I'd never be one of them. Good. I didn't want to be. 2 months in, I was scrolling Reddit and saw a post about private equity firms looking for industry experts to identify acquisition targets. Something clicked. I knew every weakness in my family's business, every skeleton, every unsustainable practice. I knew exactly how to take them down. That night, I started making calls to old industry contacts, people who'd been burned by Dad over the years, suppliers who'd been squeezed, former employees who'd been discarded. Turns out, I wasn't the only one with an axe to grind. I'm not proud of what I did next. Actually, scratch that. I am proud. They wanted to call me a leech? Fine. I'd show them what happens when the leech decides to drain you dry. That was 3 months ago. Yesterday, I got the email confirming my new position. The fund I'm working with specializes in distressed business acquisition. And guess which company just popped up on our radar after defaulting on their equipment loans? Family loyalty cuts both ways. They threw me away like I was nothing. Now I'm coming back to return the favor. Dad said I'd never be one of them? He was right. I'm going to be the one who takes everything they built. Update. It's wild how 3 years can transform someone from family leech to the guy managing millions in acquisition capital. For those who missed my first post, which blew up way more than expected, the TLDR is that my family business threw me away like yesterday's trash when I refused to co-sign my nephew's doomed vanity project. My father called me a leech and said I'd never be one of them. Spoiler alert. He was right, but not in the way he thought. Look, I promised an update when things got interesting. Well, grab your popcorn because what happened last week was better than anything I could have scripted. The first 6 months after leaving were brutal. My apartment's heating broke twice during winter. I lived on ramen and whatever, was BOGO at the grocery store. Had to sell my car and downgrade to a 10-year-old Civic with mysterious stains on the back seat. My dating app matches dried up once I changed my job status. Rock bottom. Pretty much. But here's the thing about being at the bottom. You can see the foundation clearly. And the foundation of my father's success was built on quicksand. I started small, working freelance financial analysis gigs through Upwork. The pay was garbage, but it kept the lights on. Each night I'd update my revenge spreadsheet. Yes, I literally made a spreadsheet for my revenge calculator guy till the end. I tracked every industry connection, every supplier relationship, every financial weakness in my father's operation. I'd fall asleep scrolling LinkedIn, looking for anyone who might have both a grudge and resources. 7 months in, I matched with someone on Bumble who turned out to work for an investment firm. Not a date match. They have this networking section called Biz. Anyway, we grabbed coffee, and I casually mentioned my background in construction financials. That led to a couple of small consulting jobs analyzing acquisition targets. The pay was decent, but more importantly, I was learning how the vultures think. Around the 1-year mark, I met Willow at an industry mixer. She ran the distressed assets division at a mid-sized investment bank and had this coldness behind her eyes that I recognized immediately. Turns out my father had undercut and then bankrupted her father's contracting business a decade earlier. Her dad never recovered, died of a heart attack 2 years later. We understood each other instantly. Willow introduced me to Kylie, who managed a private equity fund specializing in construction and manufacturing acquisitions. Kylie wasn't interested in my revenge fantasy. She only cared about ROI. But she did appreciate my insider knowledge of regional operations and their vulnerabilities. I started consulting for her fund, identifying potential acquisitions and weaknesses that wouldn't show up in standard due diligence. Meanwhile, Barry's luxury tiny home project imploded spectacularly, just as I'd predicted. I didn't have to do anything but watch from afar. He'd been posting progress shots on Instagram for months. Lots of filters, lots of hashtags, zero actual progress. Then suddenly, radio silence. His TikTok pivoted to crypto day trading tips, which told me everything I needed to know. The project was dead. The second year was all about positioning. I moved into a better apartment, started rebuilding my savings, bought decent clothes again. On the surface, I was recovering nicely from my family separation. But underneath, every move was calculated. Every connection I made, every skill I developed, was another piece on the chessboard. I created a private Discord server where I collected information from former employees, competitors, and suppliers who'd been burned by my father. Nothing illegal, just documentation of patterns, late payments, contract violations, safety corners cut. The picture it painted wasn't pretty. Around the 18-month mark, I got a text from Susan. First contact since I'd left. Her message was peak Susan. No apology, just asking where some old client files were stored because they couldn't find them. I left her on read for 3 days, then sent back a single word, server. She responded with a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. 15 years of supposed family ties reduced to a thumbs-up. The text bothered me more than it should have. For a week, I found myself checking my family members' social media accounts late at night. Gavin was posting about unprecedented growth. My father had been featured in a local business magazine, looking smug in a new suit. They seemed to be doing fine without me. Had I overestimated my importance? Was I just being petty? Then I noticed something in the background of one of Gavin's office selfies. Boxes of documents piled up. The same boxes I used to process every month. They were months behind on their paperwork. A quick check of public records showed they'd filed their tax extension. They were drowning without me, just hiding it well. That realization reignited everything. I doubled down on my plan. The breakthrough came at the 2-year mark when one of my father's former project managers reached out through LinkedIn. He'd been fired for questioning a safety decision that later resulted in an OSHA violation. We met for beers, and he let slip that the company was seeking outside investors. The luxury tiny home debacle had drained more capital than expected. They were bleeding cash and looking for a bailout. Here's where I got lucky. Kylie's fund had recently raised capital, specifically targeting regional construction operations. The market was consolidating, and they wanted to roll up several smaller operations into one efficient entity. I brought her the intel on my father's business, presented as just another potential acquisition target. I didn't mention my connection at first, kept it professional. The numbers made sense on their own. The company had solid assets, a decent client list, but terrible cash flow management. Classic case of a business that could be profitable under competent financial leadership. Kylie was interested, but cautious. There were other potential acquisitions with less complicated financials. I knew I needed to sweeten the deal, so I did something that still gives me a twisted sense of pride. I invested nearly all of my savings into Kylie's fund as a limited partner, specifically earmarked for this acquisition. Essentially, I was putting my own money behind my revenge plan. That got her attention. The due diligence process took months. I stayed in the background, providing insights without revealing my full history. When Kylie finally asked why I was so interested in this particular acquisition, I told her the truth. All of it. I expected her to back out. Mixing business with personal vendettas is usually a red flag. Instead, she seemed impressed by my patience and planning. She said most people would have done something stupid and emotional years ago. 2.5 years after walking out, we made our move. The initial offer was deliberately low, designed to be rejected. My father predictably responded with indignation, called the offer insulting, claimed the business was worth 3 times that amount. Classic Wesley negotiation tactic, bluster and intimidation. It might work with small subcontractors, but a private equity fund? They eat bluster for breakfast. We waited a month, then came back with a slightly improved offer and detailed documentation of every financial weakness, every over-leveraged asset, every pending liability. The message was clear. We know exactly how desperate you are. Around this time, I noticed my father had listed his lake house on Zillow. The asking price was well below market value. He needed cash, and fast. Barry had posted on LinkedIn that he was seeking new opportunities. Code for unemployed. Gavin's wife was selling her designer handbags on Poshmark. The house of cards was collapsing. Our third offer came with an expiration date and was just enough to cover their outstanding debts. The alternative was bankruptcy. They had no choice but to accept. The final stage was setting up the board meeting to formalize the acquisition. Kylie asked who should represent the fund at the meeting. Without hesitation, I volunteered. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't object. We both knew this wasn't just business for me. I spent the final week before the meeting in a strange state of calm fury. I bought a new suit, got a haircut, even splurged on those pretentious minimalist sneakers that cost more than my monthly rent. The night before, I rehearsed what I would say a dozen times in my bathroom mirror. Not the business details. Those were solid, but the one sentence I'd been crafting for 3 years. The one I wanted to sear into my father's brain. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at their offices, soon to be our offices. I arrived at 9:45, sat in my car, and opened my phone's notes app where I'd written, "Remember, they chose this, not you." Then I walked in, 3 years of calculated rage disguised in Italian wool. I won't bore you with the details of the acquisition meeting itself. Standard procedure. Lots of legal jargon. Lots of signatures. What matters is the moment my father realized who exactly was buying his company. The moment he understood that the son he'd discarded as worthless had returned to take everything. That's when I said the sentence. Just 8 words that made him stand up and walk out without a single word in response. I'll tell you what those words were in my next update, because what happened afterward, the systematic dismantling of not just his business, but his entire self-image, deserves its own post. Let's just say that calling someone a leech has consequences when that person decides to really start sucking blood. Update 2. Revenge fantasies never play out like you imagine. They're messier, more complicated, and, honestly, way more satisfying than the version you rehearsed in your head. A lot of you have been DMing me for this final update, so here it is. The conclusion to my 3-year chess game against the family that threw me away. Look, I promised to reveal the 8 words that made my father walk out of that board meeting. But first, let me set the scene properly. The morning of the acquisition meeting, my Uber driver asked why I looked like I was heading to both a funeral and a job interview. Fair question. I'd barely slept the night before. alternating between checking our acquisition documents and scrolling through old family photos on my phone. Not out of nostalgia. I needed to remember exactly why I was doing this. The rage had to stay fresh. I arrived 30 minutes early and waited in my car, watching my family members arrive one by one. Susan, first, always punctual, looking stressed in last season's blazer. Then Gavin, his BMW's clear coat peeling badly, small sign of their financial troubles. Barry skulked in, wearing what looked like his only suit, scrolling through his phone with that familiar furrowed brow of someone checking their dwindling bank balance. My father arrived last, parking in his reserved spot, straightening his tie in the reflection of the lobby doors, still playing CEO when he was about to lose everything. At exactly 9:58 a.m., I walked in with Kylie and our legal team. The receptionist knew since my time, didn't recognize me. She offered me coffee while I waited. I accepted, hiding my smile behind the paper cup. The conference room was exactly as I remembered: faux mahogany table, uncomfortable chairs, and that pretentious oil painting of the company's first completed project. My father had hung it to remind everyone of his humble beginnings, though there was nothing humble about Wesley. The initial double take when I walked in was worth every second of the 3-year wait. Susan dropped her pen. Gavin's mouth actually hung open like some cartoon character. Barry looked confused, then terrified. He'd clearly been kept in the dark about how bad things really were. But my father? His reaction was perfect. Complete stillness, then a slow reddening of his face from the collar up, like a thermometer in the sun. Here's the thing about powerful men: when they're cornered, they resort to what worked in the past. My father immediately tried to take control of the room, standing up and attempting to guide the meeting his way. He referred to me as my son, with this forced joviality, as if I was just stopping by for a family visit. Classic gaslighting attempt. Kylie, bless her shark-like soul, shut that down immediately. She laid out the terms of the acquisition with brutal efficiency. No small talk, no nicety, just the cold hard facts of their financial reality. They were drowning in debt. We were their life raft. The price was non-negotiable. The data presentation was my part. I had prepared a 37-slide deck detailing every financial misstep, every structural weakness, every questionable decision made over the past 3 years. Not with anger, but with the precision of the calculator my father had mocked. Each slide was another nail in the coffin of his legacy. Halfway through, Gavin tried to interrupt, claiming some of my figures were outdated. I pulled up their latest P&L statement, the one they had submitted to our due diligence team just 2 weeks earlier. His own numbers contradicted him. He slumped back in his chair, suddenly fascinated by his Apple Watch. When I got to the slide about Barry's failed project, my nephew couldn't take it anymore. He left the room, mumbling something about needing water. The financial autopsy of his business venture was apparently too much to witness. He didn't return. Susan sat there taking notes, her handwriting getting progressively smaller as the reality set in. I almost felt bad for her. She had always been caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace. But then I remembered how quickly she'd turned on me 3 years ago. Sympathy evaporated. As we approached the end of the presentation, my father tried one last power move. He suggested we take a break, have lunch brought in, continue discussions in a more relaxed setting. Translation: he wanted time to regroup, to find some leverage, some way out. Kylie checked her Rolex and reminded him that the offer expired at noon. It was 11:27 a.m. That's when my father played his final card, the family card. He looked directly at me, ignoring everyone else in the room. His tone shifted to that paternalistic voice he used when he wanted something. He started talking about family legacy, about blood being thicker than water, about how disappointed my late mother would be seeing us like this. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Even our lawyers looked uncomfortable. Kylie glanced at me, clearly wondering if I was going to lose my composure. 3 years earlier, I might have. Instead, I calmly opened a folder I'd brought separately from our official documents. Inside was a single piece of paper, a bank statement showing my personal investment in the acquisition fund. A very significant portion of the money being used to buy them out was, in fact, mine. My money. Money I'd earned after being cast out. I slid the paper across to him without a word. He stared at it, then at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. This wasn't just business. This wasn't just Kylie's fund acquiring a distressed asset. This was me, taking back what should have been mine all along. That's when I said the 8 words, the sentence I'd been crafting for 3 years. Looking him directly in the eyes, I said, I learned to be a leech from the best. Simple, not dramatic, just the cold, hard truth. He had spent decades sucking value from others, employees, suppliers, family members, and discarding them when they questioned him. Now he was experiencing what that felt like from the other side. He stood up without a word, straightened his tie, walked to the door, and left. Gavin started to protest, but our lead attorney reminded him that his father had already signed the preliminary agreements. The acquisition was happening with or without his approval. Susan just sat there, suddenly looking much older than her 42 years. The rest of the meeting was anticlimactic. Signatures, handshakes, legal formalities. By 2:30 p.m. it was done. The company my father had built over 30 years was no longer his. The ownership structure gave me effective control, with Kylie's fund as the majority shareholder on paper. I'd love to tell you that I felt this massive wave of satisfaction in that moment. The truth, I felt nothing, empty. Like when you finally beat that impossible level in a game and realize you've been grinding for so long you forgot to enjoy it. That emptiness lasted about 48 hours. Then the real work and the real satisfaction began. Day 1 of new ownership. I moved into my father's office, had his name removed from the door before lunch, sent a company-wide email outlining the transition, and requesting one-on-one meetings with all department heads. My father had apparently told no one about the acquisition classic Wesley, hiding the truth until the last possible moment. Day 2, I discovered the executive bathroom had a biometric lock programmed only for my father and Gavin. Had it reprogram it for the entire management team. Small thing, but symbolically important. By the end of week 1, I had identified the loyal employees worth keeping and the family sycophants who needed to go. No mass firing. That would hurt operations. Instead, strategic reassignment. Gavin was promoted to client relations for our smallest, most problematic customer. Susan was given the choice to stay in HR or take a severance package. She took the money and was gone by Friday. Week 2, I started reaching out to former employees who had been unfairly terminated. Offered several of them their jobs back with proper compensation. 3 accepted. One of them, an operations manager my father had fired for questioning safety protocols, now runs our largest division. The most satisfying moment came a month later when my father showed up unannounced, demanding to speak with me. The security guard, newly hired, with no knowledge of who Wesley was, made him wait in the lobby for 45 minutes while I finished a Zoom call I could have easily rescheduled. Power moves work both ways. When I finally had him shown in, he looked smaller somehow. His custom suit hung loose. He'd lost weight. The Rolex was gone, replaced by something generic. He tried to act like he was still somebody, striding in and taking a seat without being offered one. He wanted to discuss a consulting arrangement, claimed the company needed his expertise during the transition. What he really needed was money. I'd done my research. He'd leveraged everything for Barry's failed project and the subsequent attempts to keep the company afloat. The lake house was in foreclosure. The fancy car was leased and payments were behind. His credit score looked like a bad bowling frame. I let him finish his pitch. Then I pulled out the same bank statement from the board meeting, my investment in the acquisition, and placed it between us. Explained that every cent of that money was earned after he called me a lead. After he said I'd never be one of them. After 15 years of being underpaid and undervalued. He left without a consulting job, without his dignity, without anything. Over the next 6 months, I methodically erased every trace of him from the company. New name, new logo, New corporate culture based on actual financial sustainability rather than gut feelings and risk. Employee benefits that actually benefited employees. Profit sharing. 401k matching. Basic stuff that any decent company should offer. The old guard who remained watched all this with suspicion, waiting for me to fail. When we posted our first quarterly profit under new management, something the company hadn't achieved in the 18 months prior to acquisition, that suspicion turned to reluctant respect. Barry reached out via LinkedIn around the 8-month mark, said he had some innovative business concepts he wanted to discuss. I left him on read. Some lessons need to be permanent. Avian lasted almost a year before resigning to pursue other opportunities. Last I heard, he's selling commercial real estate in Florida. Not very successfully, according to his increasingly desperate social media posts. As for my father, he downsized to a condo on the other side of town, started a consulting business that seems to consist mainly of posting LinkedIn articles about entrepreneurial resilience and attending Chamber of Commerce mixers. His profile still lists him as founder of the company, though I've had our legal team send multiple cease and desist letters about that. The final twist came just last month. One of our biggest potential clients, a regional developer we'd been courting for years, finally signed with us. During the meeting, their CEO mentioned that they'd previously met with my father, who had apparently spent the entire time bad-mouthing me and the new management. They signed with us anyway. Why? Because they'd done their research. The numbers spoke for themselves. The very thing my father had dismissed, my attention to financial details, was what won the business. So here we are, 3 years and 3 months after being called a leech. The company is thriving. The people who deserve success are finding it, and the man who thought he was irreplaceable has been thoroughly replaced. Is it petty to take this much satisfaction in someone else's downfall? Maybe. But as the saying goes, don't start none, won't be none. Family should be the people who value you most, not the ones who exploit you longest. Sometimes the real family business is the boundaries you build along the way.